So we're just talking off air there, Ali. It seems a long time ago in one way, the death of George Nkencho, which was a huge story. It happened during COVID, and just in the months after, George Floyd was killed in the US. So there was a lot going on, but all these years on, now we're finally getting to a point where an inquest is going to be held. Why has it been delayed, I suppose? And what remind people, I suppose, what did happen that day?
Yeah, so it was 30th of December, I think, in 2020. So it'll be 5 years in just before New Year's Eve this year, at the end of this year. And George Nkencho, who lives in kind of Hartstown, went down to his local shop, Eurospar, and seems to have got into a conflict with a shopkeeper and possibly others, and was acting in a very kind of violent and aggressive manner. He had a knife, which was probably the most serious thing, but he also, I think, physically attacked the shopkeeper in the Eurospar. I think he might have headbutted him, but he was acting in a way that was very scary to anyone who had to witness it. So gardaí were called, and they attended the scene. And at this point, George is beginning to walk back towards his home, and the guards were kind of trying to interact with him, telling him to drop his knife. I think they were kind of slowly following behind him, trying to approach him, trying to get him to drop the knife. It appears he wouldn't. And then he eventually got to his house, was only a few minutes walk, and he eventually got to his house. And at this point, local gardaí, I think, had phoned the armed support unit because they were afraid of the danger this young man posed to other people.
And so the armed support unit are called in if there's, I suppose, a risk to life, or somebody obviously is armed or carrying a weapon.
Or a serious incident. Yeah, like if there's, it's a very serious matter. It's at the highest end of the scale when the armed support unit are called to any live crime, like it would have happened recently, like it with the tragedy up in Louth. They would have been called in the aftermath of it. Yeah.
And they have particular training, I suppose, on how to intervene, how to assess these things, how to talk to people in circumstances. Now, of course, like I remember it happening, and straight away there were videos of the incident being shared around within minutes. So you can see George Nkencho comes to the sort of the garden area of a house in Clonee, which is his family home, and his family kind of come to the door. And at that point, then, obviously, I don't know if the armed support unit knew that was his family or didn't know, but obviously then a shot is fired, or maybe two shots, is it? But anyway, a shot is fired, and
well, like before the shots were fired, like it's called, I think it's called a graduated policing response is the official thing that they call it, Niall.
Yeah.
So before he was shot, he would have been tasered.
Yes.
And the purpose of tasering someone is that it gives them a shock to their body, and they therefore drop the weapon, in this case, be it a knife.
Which you can see in the video at all times, and I think there is a video as well of a police car following him from the Eurospar home. You can see him carrying. Yeah. It looks like a large knife, isn't it? It's not. It's like,
a large kitchen knife, essentially. Yeah, and I think unfortunately he was wearing, because it was obviously the depth of winter, he was wearing a kind of heavily padded black jacket, and for that reason the taser didn't have the desired effect. It didn't get through his jacket and and shock him sufficiently to drop the knife, which is just really tragic, I suppose. And so that's what was going on. So he's on the porch acting very erratically, kind of lunging around with a knife. Gardaí continues to try and talk to him. I think you're right in terms of local Gardaí, I think, who would have followed him from Eurospar. They would have known, I believe anyway, they would have known that was his home. The armed support unit wouldn't have, I suppose, unless the local Gardaí had an opportunity to tell them. We don't know. Maybe that's something that will emerge at the inquest. But essentially, he's on the porch with the knife, acting erratically. his siblings are trying to calm him down, and they're also trying to speak to gardaí who are trying to tell them to get back into the house. So this is a really live situation, Niall, as well. Like this is all, everything's happening in a very, very short space of time. The guards are kind of shouting at the families, please get back into the house, because they're afraid that they're afraid he's going to stab one of them, essentially, you know, or go towards gardaí and try and stab one of them. So this continues, this situation, and one of his sisters, one of George's sisters, Gloria, she was kind of calling out to the guards from the doorway, like, he's my brother. He's not a danger. He's not well. He's, trying to express that he has mental health problems, but that she didn't feel that he was a danger. But I suppose gardaí made the split-second decision that he was posing a significant threat to life, and they opened fire.
And of course, I think he died shortly after. As a result.
Yeah, he did. And I mean, there was a lot of dialogue, I remember, around the time about why didn't gardaí shoot him in the leg, for example, or try and shoot him in the arm. And I remember kind of speaking to a couple of experts about it, and that's never a policy with the guards. They're trained to aim at certain parts of the body, which are quite likely to kill, I suppose, in the upper chest area.
Yeah, and that's a
common practice in police worldwide. You know,
I mean, obviously the belief would be that if you're aiming at somebody's leg or whatever, you might only get one chance, and obviously it's less of a chance of disabling the person who they feel is a danger. Now, obviously the family subsequently, held a lot of public meetings and have engaged with the media, done interviews at the time and subsequently. And they, of course, have a different perspective. They have a perspective on George Nkencho as being somebody who suffers from severe mental illness. And a lot of, that, and I don't even think that is in dispute, that while he did have some convictions, if I remember correctly, he had also
a couple of minor things. Yeah, I think,
nothing particularly, nothing of any organized crime or anything like that.
Oh gosh, no.
But he had a couple of convictions, probably associated with the fact that he had suffered a mental illness, and they sort of believed that he was, essentially an unwell person.
Yeah, and I mean they've always maintained that, and I've met most of the family now, and to see the impact that it's had on them is immeasurable, really. And on a human level, I mean, you have to feel for any family that loses someone in those kind of circumstances, and the George they remember is not the person who was shot dead while he stood on his patio in the midst of a mental health crisis. Then on the other side of the coin, to be fair to the gardaí, they have to deal with the violent unfolding situation. But yeah, I think the Nkencho family, they started a conversation around, was there class and racial bias in play that night when he was shot, and that's kind of began a debate around this.
Yeah, of course. As I said, it was, I just looked it up there about George Floyd, which of course is the very famous American case that led, I suppose, to the Black Lives Matter movement, and had a deep impact on American society at the time. Obviously, he was a black man who had been, who was tackled by police and died, and a couple of police officers went to prison, and it was a big story worldwide. So I suppose George Nkencho happened shortly after that. And the guards, obviously the family felt that it wasn't, his death wasn't necessary, let's put it that way. Now, there was a lot of investigations have gone on since, both within the gardaí and by GSOC or Forza as they're called now. What happened with those investigations, and do we know exactly what happened, I suppose?
Yeah, so it'd be obviously common practice for the Garda Ombudsman now fiercely to probe when Well, actually, when a guard uses their firearm in any situation, no one even has to be injured. When a guard uses his firearm, they look at why, I suppose. So there was obviously an investigation into this, and it was a huge investigation, probably one of the biggest investigations they ever had. And it went on until April of this year, and they sent a file to the Director of Public Prosecutions outlining all the facts of the case that they established. They obviously would have interviewed all the gardaí who were on the scene, including the Garda who would have fired the shots, all of George Nkencho's family who were present, all witnesses to it, including everybody in the, people in the Eurospar and who encountered him earlier. So it was a huge investigation. And then they gave all this information, presented all this information to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and they returned, obviously it took the DPP quite a while to consider it. It was such a big Garda file. And they came back and said nobody should face criminal charges in relation to this matter, essentially. So I think the Gardaí were informed, the Gardaí in particular who used their firearms, they were informed of that in April, that they were not in any bother, I suppose. They hadn't done anything wrong, was the decision.
Yes. Now, obviously, that's the role of the ombudsman. They can recommend charges, and it's an independent oversight into the Gardaí, and they have the power then to recommend to the DPP if charges are to be brought. Now, you interviewed Gloria this weekend, George's sister, and she's speaking about the upcoming inquest, because the inquest is a different type of inquiry, I suppose, conducted by the state. An inquest doesn't seek to nothing criminal charges cannot arise out of it.
No, and it doesn't seek to attribute blame. Yeah,
it doesn't seek to attribute blame to an individual anyway, but it can, it's an attempt to uncover the facts of what happened, I suppose, and maybe to make recommendations. And I thought Gloria, George's sister, spoke very very movingly, really, about what she hoped for, and also spoke about, recognizing that. What she hopes for is more than just, she doesn't, just want a guard put in the dock. What she hopes for is sort of a systemic change, I suppose, in how the Gardaí maybe approach these circumstances, and maybe a look at what she perceives as being a racial or a class bias in this case.
Yeah, so I think, the family, they realise that there's not going to be any criminal trial, clearly, at this point. So this inquest is going to be the last public forum where what happened to George that day will be discussed. And there's been quite a lot of debate and conversations with the coroner about the scope of the inquest. So the Nkencho family, through their solicitors, have asked that it examine policing issues around his death. So they want to get into why the decision was made to fire shots, and their view is that decision should not have been made, and for there to be, I suppose, a review of that, so that maybe in a similar situation again, that there might be a different resolution rather than opening fire. Like that's what they're looking for, and they've made submissions to that effect. The Gardaí have also made submissions. We don't know what they are yet. You would presume it's to keep it relatively straightforward to the facts of the case. I suppose, like, an inquest is supposed to establish the who, what, when, where, and how of a person's unnatural death. So that could be someone who's shot, that could be someone who dies of drug overdose or medical misadventure. In this case, obviously, it's someone who was fatally shot. But a coroner can make a decision to expand it quite significantly, to examine all these wider issues if it's deemed suitable. But it's highly unusual. Like, this case has been listed for 2 weeks, which is pretty much unheard of for it to be going on that long. I think there's over 240 people have given statements in relation to could be called as witnesses. Well, there's 240 statements, but I think around 50, 60 witnesses. We're not sure yet. That hasn't been decided. But this is going to be massive in terms of, it's going to be the first proper evaluation in a kind of official setting where we're really going to hear both sides of the story, rather than just the family, who've chosen to be quite vocal, as is their right, or else, GSOC, the Fiercely, the Garda Ombudsman, they haven't said as much really because of their official capacity. And the Guards really haven't had an opportunity to say anything yet. Yeah. So this is going to be a really interesting kind of platform for everybody to discuss. And I think we're going to find out things that we didn't know about what happened leading up to George's death. We're going to get the specifics,
Yeah, and I suppose inquests, look, they vary in length, but you're talking 2 or 3 days most for.
Oh yeah, I covered inquests for as a freelance years, for a couple of years. A lot of them are only an hour or two. A lot of them are really quick, and then the more complicated ones can go on a few days. Sometimes a week is extraordinarily long, and 2 weeks. I can't think of one that long. And since the Dougie Baby House of Horrors case with baby Nolene and the Cynthia Owen case, that was over 2 weeks. But it's very rare for an inquest to go on that long. So the coroner has said she's willing to explore lots of aspects of this, which is all the family ever really wanted. And I think you're right there, Niall, what you said. Gloria said that she's not interested in seeing a Garda being held, being kind of hauled over the coals. She was like, they've gone past that any feelings of anger she said that they may have had. That's gone now. She said, well, it's not going to bring my brother back. I'd rather he was alive than, I don't want to see somebody be sent to jail, for example, which he clearly isn't going to be. But it seems that they want kind of system changes, accountability, and some kind of they describe it as justice for their brother, who they say they haven't grieved properly yet because it's there's been these kind of ongoing investigations in the background, and we're nearly 5 years on.
So the guards obviously can be called to give evidence, and probably slightly unusually, they're going to be granted anonymity, which is not unheard of. But certainly some guards, if they work for particular units at times in courts, if, for example, they work for undercover units, they can be just described as Garda A or Garda B. Something similar is going to be allowed in this case.
Yeah, that is really unusual. I don't think I've ever seen this at an inquest, personally. So I'm not quite sure how that'll work. Will they just be giving evidence maybe remotely from somewhere else and their faces be blurred? I'm not quite sure. Or maybe it's just that it'll be an order that they can't be photographed or identified. And I think that's it's for their own security and their own safety. And I don't think too many people would have a problem with that. I don't think the Nkencho family would. And unfortunately, as you know, Niall, we live in a society where, if somebody decided to put those pictures of that guard online, could you have some kind of strange people coming out of the woodwork to try and cause harm to them? It's you just don't know. So I think that's the view. And I suppose, those guards have been through quite a lot too in terms of dealing with the aftermath of this case. Because I don't think any Garda, I know that no Garda would want to shoot anybody dead. So I think it shows that the coroner is considering all sides here, Yeah,
and obviously the Nkencho, family have said they don't want to narrow in on one individual in terms of the guards. No. They want to focus on this, you can see that obviously somebody has ended up dead, and that is nobody wants to see that. But in what? Yeah. So a coroner, they can make recommendations, I suppose, ultimately, and presumably it's a jury are there as well, which is, I suppose, something that people don't focus in on. What role does a jury play in an inquest?
Yeah, well, it'd be very different to a criminal trial where they have to reach a verdict. So they very much, the jury will sit there and listen to all of the evidence over the 2 weeks, and then the coroner will address them and give them some options in terms of recommendations, for example. So she might say, for example, it's open to you to make a recommendation that Gardaí could review some aspect of firearms and when they choose to shoot their guns, essentially, that's just an example. I'm not saying that that's what she's going to recommend at all. Or, there could be lots of different things around that. And then she also will present them with a verdict. So, it can be a narrative verdict where it could be that George Nkencho died as a result of gunshot wounds, or it could be like an unlawful killing, which I don't think it will be in this case because it's been deemed that there was no criminal case to answer.
And of course, a narrative verdict is something that always confuses people, but it's basically a narrative verdict is where you're not assigning any particular blame, but you're explaining something. Is that a sort of...
Yeah, so it could be, so I've seen a couple of them, it could be something, it's like a couple of sentences, so that the coroner's court verdict is that, for example, George Nkencho died as a result of gunshot wounds.
Yeah.
And kind of keep it simple like that. But it'll be up to the coroner how, and then she could give the jury a few options of what of verdicts as well,
Yeah, so it'll be a very well covered case because there was huge interest in this, and it does raise issues, I suppose. So it's starting in 2 weeks, is it? And what is the name of the coroner that's going to hear the case?
It's Dr. Myra Cullinan. No, it's starting in the full inquest, I think, is starting on January 13th, but it's up again briefly for mention, I think, on October 20th. And that's when the coroner is going to invite Fiersu, the Garda Ombudsman, to make their submissions. So the Guards have made submissions about what they want to happen at this inquest, what should be included, what should not be included. The Nkencho family, through their solicitors, have made submissions. So now Fiersu will make their submissions. And then the coroner will have to go away and look at all of these submissions and decide how she wants to run this inquest, because it's her inquest. She's in complete control. Everything is under her power. Now, look, she'll have 3 sets of legal teams there, giving their, trying to, very much like a criminal case in some ways, saying, I don't think this witness should be called, and all of those things do go on at an inquest as well, And I think Gloria believes anyway that she's going to be allowed to read some kind of victim statement to the court, because she will be called as a witness because she was there on the night and witnessed what happened. So I think the family are looking at it as, like I was saying, a public forum to discuss everything that happened that night, to delve into what happened to their brother that night. And they hope it'll give them, look, closure, she said, is even the wrong word, but it'll be a bit of finality to it. And that they then, they'll always, she said, like, they mourn him every day, they grieve him every day, they honor him every day in particular ways. But at least they can kind of stop fighting for them, is what they've said, that they'll know they'll have done everything that they could to remember him and to get the answers. So that's how they're looking at it.
Yeah, and these inquests over the years, I've seen and spoken to people, where the inquests have really been very, very important for them, and I suppose for how the loss of their loved ones is remembered in the public eye. So it's definitely something we'll return to, and it'll be interesting to see how the coroner, the arguments for how the coroner will shape the scope of this inquest. So we'll come back to it then in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Al.
Thanks, Ali.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.